Hello and welcome to the first Kevin's Corner of 2020. Happy New Year to everybody and thank you for joining me. Hopefully this is not your first time that you have tuned in for Kevin's Corner, but I figured today would be a good time to just quickly re-explain what it is, especially if you're just starting out fresh. And then I'm going to move into my topic today, which is about how to make changes to your estate plan, the follow-up from the last. Kevin's Corner is this. You get treated to roughly 5 to 7 minutes of me just talking about a legal topic. Everyone has some legal question they want answered for free, right? So there's usually a call in, an email, a frequently asked question, and we're trying to answer those kinds of things, just to give a nutshell answer to why something is a certain way, or just explain a topic of law that's relevant to what we do, estate planning, estate administration, and elder law. So if you have a question like that that you want answered, or you just want to get more information, you can see all of these Kevin's Corner. We do it every Thursday right around noon. And you can also send in questions via email. You can send it in via Facebook Messenger, in the comments of these videos. That's how we've gotten at least some of them through our website. You can submit an inquiry that way. Whatever it is that works for you. I always like to talk, as you've probably gleaned that by now. And so there's plenty of things I can discuss if you have any questions. Okay? So let's talk about the topic for today. 2 weeks ago, right before Christmas, I did a topic that was about the year-end review. It's always advisable to go back and look at your estate plan to see if it needs to be changed. I try to give some ideas and see that video on Facebook for the longer explanation of certain things you should be looking for, so you're not just taking out a document cold and trying to figure out what to do about it. And what I had mentioned generally was, other than if it's just really, really old, like 15 years old, you want to look and see if the beneficiaries have changed, the fiduciaries, the people in charge of your estate plan have changed or cannot do it anymore. Make sure you have things like trust funding done. It appropriately owns assets. And then if there's anything that has changed in you, your own health, your aging, etc., that means the estate plan should be reviewed. See that longer one. Now today what I wanted to talk about is, what does that actually look like? This is a very common question when we get engaged to do an estate plan is, okay, when I want to change it, how do I do that? And the answer, like all good legal questions, is it depends. It depends on what it is you're changing. So I thought what I would do is I would explain a couple of the common ones that come up, the more frequent ones that come up, to explain how it might change in your estate plan. Because a lot of times I think the hesitancy is people don't want to come in because they think they're starting over. Or they think that they're doing something that's going to be extremely expensive, extremely complicated, a big project to be undertaken, which sometimes is the case. I mean, you could be doing a totally new plan, but more often than not isn't the case. So I'll just kind of explain what that could look like. All right. So first I'll talk about trust funding. If you already own a trust, like a revocable trust, a living trust, which is what a lot of clients have anymore, it needs to be appropriately funded. That's one of the things I suggest that you should go through and take a look at. If that's the case, and it needs to be changed, updated, because say you acquired a new piece of real estate that the trust doesn't own appropriately, or you got a new business, you started a new business, and now you have a business which would otherwise be a probate asset, and you want to avoid that scenario. Those are things that attorneys can do. If it's a business, depending on some of the circumstances, that might be easily assignable to your trust. A piece of real estate might be done by a new deed, maybe not, it depends what it is, but it is probably a very succinct, straightforward project. Not a very time-consuming one either, not a very expensive one, quite frankly. It just depends on what it is. I should have said, because I don't think I said it last time, is even nowadays, sometimes I find that if people did an expertly funded trust 15 years ago, and the trust itself doesn't need to change, sometimes there's even better options for trust funding. That has occurred. By way of example, that now in Texas, as of at least a few years ago, you could do a transfer on death deed. A trust didn't have to own a piece of real estate necessarily. Now, we were already doing that sometimes with ladybird deeds, but it gave another tool, another indicator, but you didn't have to do it the way you did it 15, 20 years ago. Maybe there's a better way to now. Same thing with vehicles was always the case. You can now, as of a few years ago, it's sort of in practice now, you can do a transfer on death for a vehicle. So the car doesn't necessarily have to be probate, especially if you want to get it to a beneficiary who is not already part of your family or your estate plan. So those are some very easy ones. That's just advice, okay? That makes it really simple. It's not very time consuming, it's not very expensive. It's just about making sure that old trust you had that still works is going to work properly. It's a tune-up for the trust. Number two is changing the beneficiaries. Now this one is unfortunately all over the map because it depends. If you're changing a beneficiary to leave everything to them in a trust, that might be more complicated. To be honest, it could be because it might be the structure is changing. Or maybe it's just names are changing. If it's names that are changing, that could be the matter of a couple of names. By way of example, we had a client who came in, brought a copy of their existing trust, had just brought in a copy of their will. They wanted to make one change to a beneficiary, figured out what we needed to do. I went back to my desk, I did the change, came back, and we signed the whole thing. So they basically, within an hour consultation, we learned about the change, did the change, executed it, and they walked back out with their updated document. It was sometimes just that simple. And that works great. If not, it might be a little bit more time consuming, but not very expensive. And then third, and this is always sometimes a good one to think, is if you're going to change the structure, like leaving everything to a trust, or maybe you're changing a lot of things because it's been a while. So it's changing the names of beneficiaries, changing fiduciaries, etc. And let's say you have a trust, okay? A living trust can be changed by amendment, where you actually do a standalone document that says these two things are becoming these two things. Or you can even do its restatement. That's usually the better way of doing it. And it sounds really grandiose, but basically you take that same trust document, same Word document, quite frankly, and you update it to the new address, the new dates. You change whatever you need to internally. And especially if the first one and then the amendment are not that far in time, so the law hasn't really changed much, it's just some of the details, you can basically redo that, click print, and re-execute it. And it's the same trust with totally... It seems like a lot, but it's actually a fairly quick and painless process. It's just the most efficient way of doing it and the most thorough way of doing it. So here's the takeaway for these points. It sounds like a lot. It might feel like a big project. You might be afraid it's a big project. But in most cases, it's actually fairly simple to make changes to a good working estate plan. It's only when it's been way too long or everything is different that it makes sense, frankly, to start from scratch. So don't let that be a hindrance to come in and take a look at your estate plan and make sure it's going to work the way you and your family expect it to. So, thank you very much. I hope you learned a lot and enjoyed our first Kevin's Corner of the year. Please tune in next Thursday right around noon for the next one. And please, if you have any ideas, send them in. Thank you very much, and I hope you all have a wonderful 2020.